The sound of my granddaughter's voice cracking on the phone hit me harder than 31 years of 3-alarm fires ever did. I did not raise my voice. I did not slam the receiver down. I just sat there in my recliner, listening to her tell me that her father, my own son, had changed the locks on my house while I was at my cardiologist's appointment. They thought an old man with a bad knee and a weak heart valve would just accept it. They thought I would fold quiet, the way I had folded quiet for 2 years of disrespect. But they forgot one thing. You don't outmaneuver a man who spent 3 decades reading blueprints and finding the load-bearing walls in buildings that were trying to kill him. The next morning, I did not call a locksmith. I did not bang on my own front door. Instead, I drove to the diner on Vine Street, ordered a stack of pancakes and 2 coffees, and waited for my son to come find me, because I knew he would. He always came looking when he needed something signed. Before I tell you how I turned a stolen house into the worst mistake of his life, let me know which city you're tuning in from down in the comments. Family. And if you believe respect runs both ways in a household, hit that like button and subscribe, because there's a lot more to this story. My name is Walter Pruitt, but most folks on the east side of Memphis just call me Pop. I'm 68 years old, and I spent 31 years as a structural engineer for the city, signing off on permits, walking through half-finished buildings, telling contractors where the steel needed to go before the concrete poured over it and hid their mistakes forever. I built my career on the principle that what you can't see is more important than what you can. A wall looks straight until the day it doesn't. A family looks solid until the day it isn't. I learned that lesson late, sitting in my own driveway at 6 in the morning. Locked out of a house I had paid off with 11 years of double shifts and a wife who worked nights at the hospital just so we could clear that mortgage before she passed. My son Marcus was 39 years old, and for most of his life I would have told you he was the proudest thing I ever built. He went to Tennessee State on a partial scholarship. He came back home with a business degree and big plans about flipping shipping containers into luxury tiny homes, some kind of trend he'd seen blowing up online. I believed in him the way you believe in your own blood, the way you believe a foundation will hold because you poured it yourself. But somewhere along the way, ambition curdled into entitlement, and entitlement curdled into something uglier when he married a woman named Renata. Renata had a smile that never made it to her eyes, the kind of smile you give a stranger you're trying to sell something to. She moved into my house with Marcus 8 months earlier, after their apartment complex got foreclosed on, and Lord, the house has never felt like mine since. The air changed. Conversation stopped when I walked into a room. My late wife, Delphine's china, the set she only used on Easter and Thanksgiving, started disappearing piece by piece, and when I asked, Renata told me with that same hollow smile that she was just borrowing a few things for a dinner party. It started small, the way water damage always starts small. A stain on the ceiling, you tell yourself, is nothing. Marcus needed $40,000 to get his container home business off the ground, he said. Just a bridge loan, just temporary. He'd pay it back with interest within the year. I told him no. Not because I didn't love him, but because I had read enough blueprints in my life to know when a foundation was cracked before the first floor even went up. His numbers didn't add up. His investors were 2 guys he'd met at a barber shop. I told him I'd helped him enough, that the house was paid for, and I intended to keep it that way. For my golden years, maybe even leave it to my granddaughter Aaliyah someday so she'd have something solid under her feet when she was grown. That's when the real campaign began. Marcus started telling people I was getting confused. He'd ask me the same question 3 times in front of company, then look at whoever was listening, like he was watching evidence pile up. Renata started leaving sticky notes around the house, reminding me to take medication I'd never been prescribed. Small things, cruel things. The kind of things that don't leave a mark. You can show a doctor, but that hollow you out from the inside, brick by brick, until you start to wonder if maybe they're right. Maybe you are slipping. 2 Tuesdays ago, it came to a head. I had invited an old friend of mine, Reginald Combs, over for dinner. Reginald was a retired bank vice president, a man I'd known since we were both teenagers bagging groceries on Beale Street, and more importantly, a man who still had connections downtown. I wanted his advice on setting up a trust for Aaliyah, something Marcus couldn't touch no matter what kind of pressure he applied. I didn't tell Marcus the real reason Reginald was coming. I just said an old friend was stopping by for dinner. Marcus showed up at the table uninvited, sliding into the seat across from Reginald with that salesman smile he'd inherited from nobody in our family, because nobody in our family ever needed to fake a smile to get what they wanted. He started talking up his container home business before the breadbasket even made it around the table. Reginald, being a polite man, asked a few questions. How was the business financed? Who were the investors? What did the projections look like? I let Marcus talk himself into a corner, the way water finds the lowest point in a foundation. Then I set my fork down and I said, Reginald, you remember the Henderson property on Mill Avenue? Reginald nodded slow, like he already knew where this was headed. That's the lot Marcus bought 2 years back, I said, going to flip 3 houses on spec. No contracts in hand, no buyers lined up, just confidence. He skipped the permits to save time, paid a cousin's friend to do the electrical work under the table. Inspector caught it 8 months in. Cost me $11,000 in fines and legal fees to keep the county from condemning the whole project and coming after his license before he even had one. Marcus's face went the color of wet cement. Dad, that's not, he started. But Reginald was already setting his own fork down, the same way you set down a tool when the job's gone bad. Marcus, he said, quiet and even, you told my associate at the bank last month you were fully self-funded for this container project. No outside debt, no prior defaults. Marcus's mouth opened and closed, like a man trying to breathe air that wasn't there anymore. Renata's fingernails stopped their tapping against the table. Reginald wiped his mouth, folded his napkin with a precision that felt like a verdict, and stood. Thank you for the dinner, Walter, he said. The greens were excellent, and thank you for the information. I don't extend credit to men who paint over cracks instead of fixing them. The door clicked shut behind him, and for 3 full seconds, nobody in that kitchen breathed. Then Marcus turned on me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen since he was 19 years old, and I caught him stealing from the church collection plate to buy sneakers. You just cost me a $250,000 relationship, he said, voice shaking. Do you have any idea what you just did, old man? I took a slow sip of my coffee. I told you I don't put my name behind shaky numbers, son, I said. I taught you that. I guess you weren't listening the first time. Renata stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor like a scream. You think this is funny? She hissed. You think humiliating him in front of his business partners is some kind of game for you, old man? I didn't answer her. I had learned a long time ago that arguing with a woman who smiled at funerals was a fight you couldn't win, only survive. Marcus grabbed the edge of the table, and for one terrible second I thought he might flip it the way I'd seen angry men do on television. But instead, he leaned in close enough I could smell the whiskey already on his breath at 6 in the evening, and he said, This is my house too, old man. Has been for 8 months. You don't get to keep humiliating me under my own roof, I corrected him, calm as I could manage. It's my roof, Marcus. Has been since 1991. He laughed, a short, ugly bark with no joy in it. We'll see about that. I should have known then. I should have packed a bag and called a lawyer that same night. But I was tired, and grief for Delphine still sat in my chest some mornings like wet sand. And some foolish part of me still believed blood meant something, that no matter how cracked the foundation got, my son wouldn't let the whole house come down on me. I was wrong. 3 days later, I went to my cardiologist appointment, same as I do every 6 weeks. And when I came home that evening, my key didn't turn. I stood on my own porch in the Memphis heat, jiggling a key that had worked for 33 years, and through the window I could see my recliner had been moved, my bookshelf rearranged, strange boxes stacked in the hallway. That wasn't mine. Marcus came to the door eventually, not opening it, just talking through the screen like I was a salesman he didn't recognize. Dad, he said, his voice doing something performative and gentle that made my skin crawl. We think it's time we had a serious conversation about your living situation. Renata's cousin is a home health aide. She's been noticing some concerning signs, some memory lapses. We just want what's safest for you. I stood there in the heat, with my key still in my hand, useless now, and I understood with a clarity that felt almost peaceful that my son had been building this case against me for months. The sticky notes, the repeated questions, all of it evidence in a trial I didn't know I was standing for. There's no concerning signs, Marcus, I said through the screen door, my voice steadier than I felt. I forgot a key code on a Tuesday because I had 3 other things on my mind. That's not dementia. That's being 68 years old in the middle of a war you started against me." He didn't answer that. He just said, "You can stay at the Magnolia Gardens facility for now, just until things settle, just until we sort out what's best." And the door stayed shut, and I stood on the porch of my own house with nowhere to sleep that night. Magnolia Gardens was not a care facility. It was a warehouse for the unwanted, dressed up with a sign out front that had a painted magnolia on it that hadn't been touched up in years, the petals peeling like old skin. The smell hit first, bleach fighting a losing battle against urine and boiled vegetables, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead in a rhythm that matched nobody's heartbeat but its own. A woman at the front desk with tired eyes and a clipboard didn't ask my name, just looked at the paperwork Marcus had already signed and said, "Room 12, give me your belt and your shoelaces. Policy for new admits." I unbuckled my belt without a word. I'd spent 31 years following protocol on job sites where the wrong move could collapse a building on a man's head. I knew when fighting the process only got you hurt worse. The room had 2 other beds. In one of them was a man named Otis, a Korean War veteran who hadn't had a real visitor in 4 months, curled small under a thin blanket, his hands shaking with a tremor nobody there had bothered to diagnose. I sat down on my own thin mattress, the plastic crinkling under me, and I looked at my hands. The same hands that had once held steel beams steady while cranes lowered them into place. The only thing in that room that still felt like it belonged to me. Marcus thought he'd buried me. He forgot that a man who spent 3 decades finding the weak point in any structure does not stop looking just because the structure is now a building full of broken people and indifferent staff. I spent the first night watching, the way I used to watch a job site before deciding where to start. Most of the staff moved through their shifts like ghosts, overworked and unseeing. But there was one young orderly, a man named Devin, who knelt down to tie an old woman's shoe without being asked, who spoke soft and patient to Otis even when Otis couldn't remember his own name some mornings. Devin had the tired eyes of a good man trapped inside a broken system, and I recognized something in him. I'd recognized in young apprentices on construction sites my whole career, somebody who just needed one person to believe he was worth more than the job he'd been handed. I started talking to Devin the way I used to talk to my crew, not down at him, but alongside him. I told him about the buildings I'd helped raise across Memphis, the bridge inspections, the years of work. Devin's grandfather had been a bricklayer, it turned out, and something in him lit up talking about masonry and load distribution with a man who actually knew what he was talking about instead of just nodding along. By the 3rd night, Devin trusted me enough to slip me his phone for 10 minutes after lights out, just enough time to call my granddaughter. Aaliyah was 16 years old, sharp as a new blade, and she had been quietly furious at her father for weeks, watching him circle me like a man circling a property he intended to condemn. When I told her where I was, she went dead silent on the phone, and then she said 4 words that told me everything I needed to know about how this story was going to end. "Pop, I'm already recording." It turned out my granddaughter had been documenting things for over a month, every strange conversation, every time her father coached her on what to say about my memory, every time Renata pocketed something from my house and called it borrowing. She was scared of her own father, but she was braver than him too, because she chose to do something about it instead of just watching. Devin helped me get a message to Reginald the next day, one careful sentence relayed through Aaliyah's phone. Reginald didn't waste a single hour. He'd spent 30 years in banking, which meant he'd spent 30 years learning exactly which lawyers handled, exactly which kinds of cruelty. And by Friday morning, an elder law attorney named Patricia Okafor was standing in the lobby of Magnolia Gardens with a court order in her hand and a look on her face that told the front desk woman this was not a conversation. It was a notification. The forms Marcus had filed to commit me, it turned out, required 2 physicians' signatures attesting to incapacity. He'd gotten one from a doctor who barely glanced at me for 90 seconds in a hallway, calling it an evaluation. The second signature was forged, Renata's cousin scrawling a name she'd seen on a prescription pad once, and forgery, Patricia Okafor informed me with something close to satisfaction in her voice, was a felony in the state of Tennessee, separate and apart from the civil case for elder financial exploitation she was already building against both of them. Backed by 16 days of recordings my own granddaughter had gathered in secret, while sitting at family dinners pretending to scroll on her phone. I walked out of Magnolia Gardens on a Friday afternoon with my belt back on my waist and my shoelaces back in my shoes, and I did not go back to my own house that day. I went to Reginald's house instead, and we sat on his porch with sweet tea while Patricia Okafor explained, slow and clear, exactly how the next 90 days were going to go. It went the way a building comes down when you've found the load-bearing wall and removed it carefully, piece by piece, not in a sudden collapse, but in a controlled, documented demolition. The forged signature unraveled the entire commitment order within a week, and with it went any claim Marcus and Renata thought they had to staying in my house rent-free. The recordings Aaliyah had gathered, paired with 3 years of bank statements Patricia subpoenaed, showed a pattern that went back further than I'd even realized. Withdrawals from an account Renata had gotten access to under the pretense of helping me pay bills online, $4,000 here, $6,000 there, money that was supposed to be going toward my property taxes and was instead going toward a leased Mercedes and a vacation to Cancun I'd never been told about. Marcus was charged with elder financial exploitation and conspiracy related to the forged commitment papers. He took a plea deal rather than risk trial, 3 years probation, mandatory restitution, and a restraining order keeping him 100 yards from my property, unless I personally invited him onto it. Renata, it turned out, had done this before. A pattern Patricia's investigator dug up from a previous marriage in Nashville, an elderly mother-in-law who died with significantly less in her estate than anyone expected. She wasn't charged in that older case, the statute had run out, but the Tennessee case against her for what she'd done to me stuck, and stuck hard. 18 months actual time, not suspended. I moved back into my house in late autumn. The locks changed again. This time by my own choosing. My own key in my own pocket. Aaliyah came to live with me for her last 2 years of high school. Her mother, my daughter-in-law from a different, kinder marriage that ended in divorce years back, agreeing it was the safest and steadiest place for her. We didn't talk about Marcus much in those 2 years. There wasn't much left to say that the courtroom hadn't already said for us. What we did talk about was the future. Aaliyah wanted to study structural engineering. She told me one evening over dinner at the same table where Reginald had once folded his napkin like a verdict, because she'd watched her grandfather find the cracks in things other people were too scared or too kind to look at directly, and she wanted to learn how to do that too, how to read a structure honestly, instead of just hoping it would hold. Last month, I drove her up to look at colleges, and we stopped at a fishing spot off the Mississippi where I used to take Marcus when he was a boy, before ambition turned into something I didn't recognize in him anymore. We sat on the bank as the sun started going down orange over the water, and Aaliyah's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, looked at the screen, and went very still. It was the acceptance email from Vanderbilt's engineering program. Full need-based aid, the kind of opportunity that changes the shape of a whole life. She read it twice before she looked up at me with tears already falling. Not the scared kind I'd watched cross her face in that nursing home lobby the day she finally told the truth to Patricia Okafor, but something else entirely, something I hadn't seen on anyone's face in my family in a long, long time. "Pop," she said, her voice cracking the same way it had on that very first phone call. I got in. I reeled my line in slow and set the rod down in the grass beside me. I thought about Delphine, about how she used to say a family was just a house you build with people instead of lumber, and that you had to keep checking the foundation the same way you'd check any other structure, because love alone doesn't hold weight, only honesty does. I thought about Marcus, somewhere across the city living with the consequences of choosing entitlement over honesty, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph exactly, just a quiet kind of peace. The kind that comes when a building finally stops leaning and settles flat onto solid ground. I pulled Aaliyah into a hug, and she buried her face in my shoulder the way she used to when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. Except now, the tears were the good kind. The kind that come after a fight you weren't sure you'd survive. "You did it, baby girl," I told her. "No, Pop," she said into my shoulder. "We did it." We sat there until the stars came out over the river, the bobbers floating still on dark water, and I understood something I hadn't fully understood at 68 years old until that exact moment on that exact riverbank. Family isn't the people who share your blood. Family is the people who help you find the cracks before the whole house comes down, and who stay to help you rebuild it afterward. brick by honest brick. I lost a son that year, but I kept a granddaughter, and I kept myself. And on that riverbank, with the Memphis sky going purple over the water, that felt like the better trade I never knew I'd have to make. Thank you for listening to my story, family. If you've ever had to choose your own peace over keeping a family together that was never really holding you up in the first place, I want to hear about it down in the comments. Tell me what city you're listening from tonight, and if you believe a man's word is the only foundation that ever really matters, hit that like button and subscribe, because there's more where this came from, and I'll be right here, waiting to tell it to you. A house only stands when the people inside it tell each other the truth, even when the truth is hard to hear. Real love isn't measured by how much silence you're willing to endure, but by how willing you are to stand up, name what's wrong, and rebuild on honest ground. Sometimes you lose someone to keep yourself, and what's left standing turns out to be sturdier than what fell. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment, while hoping to leave you with a genuine, positive life lesson.